Hi, my name is Kim Daniels, and I'm with Georgetown's Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life. We're so glad to be hosting this gathering in cooperation with the Archdiocese of Washington on justice and faith, family and community, Latino leadership in a time of crisis. This discussion is part of our Latino Leaders series of gatherings for young Latino Catholics. We're so grateful to have so many people here from around the country to join us in our discussion. Tonight we'll respond to the twin crises facing Latino communities right now: the injustice and racism revealed by the death of George Floyd and the outrage it has created, and the disproportionate impacts of the COVID-19 crisis on Latino and other communities of color, with families, neighborhoods, parishes hit hard by the disease, as well as the economic disarray that comes with it. We'll have an opportunity for questions and answers later on in our discussion, so please send any questions you have to the email that you see on your screen. And please also share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag Latino Leaders and by tagging the initiative at GUCST Public Life on Twitter. So joining us for our discussion tonight are Bishop Mario Dorsenville of the Archdiocese of Washington. He leads the U.S. Bishops' Committee on Migration and also is a pastoral leader here in Washington, D.C. and head of the Archdiocese Hispanic Ministry. Juan Belmont Guerrero is the program manager for the Kalmanovitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Poor here at Georgetown. Michael Okińczyc-Cruz is the executive director and co-founder of the Coalition for Spiritual and Public Leadership in Chicago, Illinois. And Olga Segura, an Afro-Dominican freelance writer and the author of the forthcoming book, Birth of a Movement, Black Lives Matter in the Catholic Church, is also joining us here today. Thank you all for being here. And now, Bishop Dorsenville, I wonder if you could start us off with a prayer.
Thank you, Kim. I would like then to invite all of you to join us in prayer. God and gracious God, we thank you for the gift of families. We are grateful for all of the joy and love that they bring us. And we ask that you provide special protection for all families, particularly for those who face hardships as they move in search of a better life, for those who are facing the pandemic time and such a difficult moments. Show mercy to those who travel in danger and lead them to a place of safety and peace. Comfort those who are alone and afraid because their families have been torn apart by violence and injustice. We ask this with courage, with love and compassion. Give us the courage to welcome every stranger as Christ in our midst. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Bishop Dorsenville, for that. And with that, let's get started. Olga, let us start with you. You're a writer who's helped lead American Media's Jesuitical podcast. You've written extensively on Catholicism and race, and you have a forthcoming book on race, as we mentioned earlier. Help us frame this discussion as we get started. What's your experience been over these past weeks and months? And where are we right now in these twin crises? What resources do Catholics, and particularly young Catholics, bring to the conversation? And what are the connections between racism and COVID-19?
Sure. So that's a really great question to start off with. So right now we find ourselves in the middle of a global pandemic. So many Americans have been sheltering in place since, I want to say, early March, give or take a few weeks. And in the months since this pandemic officially started in the United States, we've seen Blacks, Latinos affected at disproportionate rates, right? And we're seeing that they're 2 times as likely to die as white Americans. And on top of the disproportionate rates we're seeing, we are also aware that people have lost their jobs, have lost insurance, there are outrageous numbers of people filing unemployment claims. So then this is happening. And then at the same time, violence, the death of Black Americans has essentially continued unabated at the hands of police officers and armed white American men. So it's been there's a lot that's going on in 2020. So I know in my own personal life, I've been trying to kind of navigate what it's like to be in a community that's extremely affected by this pandemic on the one hand. And then while we're trying to figure that out, because we can't be in community, we can't see our communities, we can't see our families. So we're trying to support each other during this global pandemic while also processing as a community over Zoom, Google Hangout, what it means to once again be faced with the reality of police brutality. And I think those are just some of the things that so many of us in the Black and Brown community are dealing with, and Americans and Catholics more broadly. And I think that I've been encouraged by a lot of the Catholic involvement that I've seen recently. And I think when you mentioned, Kim, the resources that Catholics can bring to this movement and to this conversation, we have Catholic social teaching, right? We have themes that teach us how to talk about what it means to care for human life, what it means to care for marginalized communities, what it means to be a pro-life faith tradition, right? And I think that we're starting to see a lot of Catholics use their faith and show up to these movements. And I think that is so powerful because we have the ability to create a space where we can say, hey, Black Lives Matter, and here's what Catholics should be doing. Here's what Catholics should be doing during a global pandemic to help these marginalized communities.
Thanks so much, Olga. And I love that you said that. And I want to turn to Bishop Dorsonville now. Bishop Dorsonville, you showed up on Monday. You were at March on Monday in Lafayette Square on these issues. You're known here in Washington as such a pastoral leader. And I want to particularly hear from you about how this crisis is a test of our nation, a test of our faith, and in particular, what young Latinos can do to respond and how we might react at a national level. I think in particular of the uncertainty facing DACA students and others as this big Supreme Court case is on deck and all the rest. Can you help us walk through those questions?
Yes, thank you, Kim. Evidently, it was a very good experience for me to gather not only with brother bishops, but priests, sisters, faithful, to work together. And particularly when they began to speak about Black Lives Matter, they were also referring to people who are crossing the border, people who have been immigrants for years here, people who are waiting to be approved to be documented people working here in the United States. Therefore, it seems that in so many ways, it is a globalized problem that faces in a real perspective how we're responsible with the human drama that we are witnessing in today's world. Then, as you may recall, Kim, yes, it has been years of working with immigrants and trying to wish and dream for something to come true, which is not to be more invisible or voiceless people, but try to get out from this kind of terrible sense of poverty, which means not to be taken into consideration, and just try to find a way to recuperate the essential teaching of the Catholic social thought, how we're going to continue to respect the human person. Right there, DACA people, our dreamers, TPS people, people who have been working, have been the shining stars of this pandemic. Why? Because they are the frontliners. We see them working in the hospitals. We're seeing them working in farms, in factories. They are just bringing the good news of being faithful citizens. Even they don't have documents, but they love the people of this country. They love the nation. They love their faith. And that's why they serve and they expose themselves to danger, which is precisely to be able to be in front lines producing their best. Therefore, I guess as we come with this debate of racism, debate of the pandemic, let us not forget about the human drama that for many years, we're speaking about 30, 40 years, many people have to endure by saying, no, I am not an American citizen. I have been living, I have been building the economy, the culture, the love to this country. And I really think that that matters for the Catholic Church and for all of us bishops and faithful in the Catholic Church.
I love that you talked about the human drama at stake, because I feel that's what we're seeing right now. And we see that most of all when we're embedded in our communities. Michael, your group, the Coalition for Spiritual and Public Leadership, does so much good in your communities. You work for justice in Chicago through grassroots efforts on the ground around racial, economic, social, and environmental issues. And you help these communities that you work in navigate these very challenging times. Tell us a little bit more about your background and work. Help us understand why COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting certain communities. And most of all, help us talk to the young Latino Catholics who are listening and how they can support their own communities.
Thank you, Kim. So one of the things that Olga shared at the beginning is that this fundamentally has to do with race. And I think that the conversation has to begin before COVID. You know, we live in a society that has been ravaged by racism and vast economic disparities for generations. So to say that our community is in a crisis at this moment because of the pandemic is certainly true, but it's more so true that our communities have been going through crises like this for generations. And so, you know, racism and our understanding of income inequality has to be at the forefront of our understanding as to why Latino, Latina, Latinx communities have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And I think to go a little bit deeper, we have to look at the economy and the way the economy is structured to be exploitative and to drive workers, brown and black workers, into conditions that are fundamentally unsafe and hazardous. Housing, you know, Pope Francis often speaks of land and the access to land and the right to land. You know, communities, Latino, Latina communities are oftentimes forced to live in cramped spaces, multiple families in one household. And scientists are saying that one of the fastest ways that communities are being infected is within the household. And, you know, we come from a culture in which family is the essence of life. You know, we're constantly visiting our abuela, abuelo, tío, our tía, you know, our cousins. You know, we sometimes are living within spaces with 10 or 12 people. And so it's easy to spread this when poverty makes it such that we're living in cramped quarters. Environmental degradation. My wife, her parents, my wife grew up in a community called La Villita in Chicago, Little Village. Just a few weeks ago, in the midst of the pandemic, a coal plant that she grew up next to about 6 blocks down the street, the city and a developer that bought that coal plant decided in the midst of a pandemic to demolish one of the smokestacks. It sent waves, a tsunami of dust through this beautiful immigrant community. And people were forced to breathe in dust and toxins for 2 weeks. People died. And to do this in the middle of a pandemic, when people are fighting for their lives against a virus that attacks our respiratory systems, just shows all the odds that are up against people of color. And lastly, I want to talk about healthcare. You know, healthcare disparities are one of the most scandalous forms of injustice in our country. Hospitals, in our case in Chicago, you know, we work in the western suburbs of Chicago and also across the region. Over the years, private investors and investment groups have bought up hospitals, largely in black and brown communities, as investments. But they oftentimes leave these hospital systems to close, and they leave communities like Maywood, like Melrose Park, communities that are historically black and brown, without hospitals, without access to a place to go to visit a doctor when they're in need. We organized at CSPL within the first few weeks of the pandemic to reopen 3 hospitals across the state of Illinois. We pushed, agitated, organized to move the governor to reopen these 3 hospitals, one of which is blocks away from our office, called Westlake Hospital. And we talk about, you know, there's all this dialogue about looting. You know, I see looting as private investors buying a hospital, running it into the ground, and doing nothing to take care of a community during a time of need. And so we've had to organize to force decision makers in our state to make sure that everybody has access to healthcare at this moment. And just going back to the economy, I think that this is such a core reason, income levels, disparities as to why people are dying in disproportionate ways and why they're getting infected in disproportionate ways. In Illinois, we have the largest temp industry in the country because we're a major logistical hub. So when you buy from Amazon and you want a package the next day, it oftentimes is going from California to the Midwest to New York City. And so, people are working in these factories day and night in unsafe, unsanitary conditions. One of my colleagues who worked in a factory for many years in his life, he's our economic justice organizer. His brother got COVID, his sister, his nieces, his nephews, one of whom is pregnant. And the common denominator is they all work in these factories where they face hazardous conditions, where they work long hours. It's only until somebody dies that the factory owners hand out PPE. It's not before, it's not during, it's at the last moment when it's already too late to prevent spread. And so this crisis precedes COVID, but we're seeing why communities are being impacted so disproportionately because of all these factors. The last thing I'll say is we have millions of immigrants who contribute so much to this country and who are completely disregarded and left out of the stimulus package when we gave over $500 billion to corporations that in many respects still laid off their workers. And so we have to say when people needed a basic lifeline, and we're only talking about $1,200 when other nations did vastly more for their people, we left millions of people out of the mix. And not only them who are undocumented, but their spouses who decided to marry an undocumented person because of love as well. And so we've done everything as a nation to put people of color in the most precarious positions.
Thanks so much for that, Michael. I love that you helped us understand what's going on in these communities and why they're disproportionately impacted. And I also love that you're doing something about it. So I'd love to hear more about that later. Juan, let's turn to you. Thank you so much for joining us. You are a friend of ours and a leader at the Kalmanovitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Poor. Before that, you attended the University of Texas as a DACA recipient. Please tell us your story and how the COVID-19 crisis and the protests that have erupted after that in the wake of George Floyd's killing have affected you and your family and friends, and how you think they're affecting young Latinos and Latino communities more broadly, especially around the kinds of issues that Michael raised.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you for having me. Whenever COVID struck our communities, I think we began to see how the immigrant community, who predominantly is in the hospitality industry, was the first one to be laid off, the first people to be impacted by this. And then on top of that, you add this crisis that's going on of our community members, our Black brothers and sisters being killed. It definitely creates what we have seen, where people see the economic uncertainties that they face every day being exacerbated by COVID. We see how our community faces so many dangers. The few folks who do have jobs put their lives at risk every day. So we've seen how our community is being attacked left and right. We see how all of our community has had enough and has been out there. I think for my family, it greatly impacted us. I actually was planning on getting married this past spring. So that definitely took a toll. And it was figuring out what do we do to protect our families, knowing that my parents don't have health insurance. Like, I knew I did not want to put them at risk of contracting COVID, knowing that if they did so, the bills that they would get would be tremendous. So it's about knowing everything that's going on. How do we protect our families? How do we protect our community? And what can we do to support them? And knowing that, for example, my parents did not receive an impact payment from the government just because my mom doesn't have any immigration status, doesn't have a social security number. So it's how do we protect each other? How do we support each other? And how do we rise up because we as a community are the ones who are protecting each other, because we see that to the government, to businesses, we can be seen as disposable workers. And many of our community members, immigrants, don't qualify for unemployment. And yeah, there's so many things impacting our community. And yeah, there's so much to talk about this.
There really is. And Olga, maybe I'll return to you for just a minute to continue this part of the conversation. I'm really struck by how interconnected all of these issues are. Michael talked for a second about the environmental damage that's going on in a community there. Little Village in Chicago, we just had Kim Wasserman from Little Village on a dialogue we hosted on Laudato Si, which is all about how all of these issues are interconnected. Juan talked about people being treated as disposable, the throwaway culture, if you will, that Pope Francis talks about. Can you help us understand how people from different communities can respond to these various interconnections and work together? What do we do to work together against the kind of challenges that we're facing?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is something that I've been thinking about in my own community, in my family, friends, and I was really struck by Juan's comment that a lot of us in these, especially immigrant communities, we've kind of over the years developed our own sense of how to help each other, because so often, especially if there's mixed immigrant status in your family, you can't go to the government for help. So I know that within my own circles, we're pulling a lot from that tradition, from those customs, and we're helping each other out when, for example, if an aunt or a relative can't receive money from the government because they're undocumented, we find ourselves reaching out to one another to provide the financial help that we might not be getting. So I think that's always a wonderful place to start. I think I've had a lot of people who have asked me, what do I do if I don't want to go to a protest because I don't want to get my newborn baby sick? I don't want to get my parents who are elderly sick. And I think one of the immediate ways to donate to, whether it's a community that's impacted by COVID or an organization or activist who's very involved in anti-racism efforts, I think always donate where you can. Research, donate to organizations that are supporting people who have been on the lines. I think the second way is have the difficult conversations. I know in my own life, I've had a lot of relatives who over the years have become very radicalized on the internet. I think they're always consuming media. They're always trying to find these extreme sort of Twitter, Facebook holes. And I think talking to each other and actively challenging the stereotypes and the problems that we've seen in our own family. And I think they're challenging our pastors. I've had a lot of people who are telling me, hey, ever since COVID started, ever since these protests started after Memorial Day, I've really been demanding that my priest show me how to speak about this. I want my pastor to not just be a place of where I can get consolation for my spirituality. I also want my priest to show me how to use the tools. You mentioned Catholic social teaching. How do we use that? And I think demanding that our parishes be better and get involved, because again, the church has a history of activism. The church has been involved in these causes for years, but hold them accountable too. I think 6 months down the line, when, we no longer have COVID rates, we have a vaccine, we passed all these policies to work toward anti-racism efforts, demand that people be better. I think the onus is, yes, within our own families, our own Latino communities, to talk amongst each other and to challenge what we're seeing. But I think also hold ourselves in the church accountable. And I think those are three immediate ways that I think people from different communities can get involved in this time period.
Well, I think you're so right. It's so important to think about the resources that our Catholic faith brings to these kinds of questions. And Bishop Dorsonville, with that, I'd like to turn to you. We've heard everybody here, I'm struck, has talked about family and the importance of family within Latino communities. I wonder if you talked about it in your prayer, of course, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how resources like the idea of a tight-knit respect for family and Catholic social teaching and our lived experience can help everybody shape their own response, particularly young people, to these crises. How can those resources, how can our families, how can our respect for those traditions and those institutions help us here?
Well, it would be important for all of us to know that across the country, the parishes are doing a magnificent job trying to bring support to families. Especially, I'm speaking about my own experience in the Archdiocese of Washington. It's amazing to see how pastors I've been able to call the youth groups, the families groups, and everyone is providing groceries, attention, humanitarian aid to people that at this moment they don't have anything to eat. I really think that it surprised me. For instance, every week I heard from pastors, we just got 1,200, 1,500 packages of food for families. And that's beautiful to see how organized, how important for them is that. However, the point is also to see that we do this because we are inspired by faith. And that is important also to now that we are just getting a young audience here. Everything in Catholic social teaching begins by the encounter with Jesus Christ, the scripture that teaches us how important is to love the other, because in his or her face, we might be able to discover the suffering face of Jesus Christ. Therefore, prayer is important, and families are asking for prayer. That's why we're just trying to continue to begin to open our churches, because we know as many families they come to worship, more strength is going to go out to help and to be in that spirit of solidarity. Accompany the family in moments of crisis, in moments that there are persecutions, in moments that there are loneliness, frustration, there are a lot of losses. Priests who are just anointing people who are dying from COVID, people who are just trying to be isolated, and we don't care, and we go into their homes because Jesus is right there with them. It's a very essential point where we say religion has more the point of humanizing a culture than dishumanized. And what's important is to find out what really is important in today's world. Perhaps everything is falling, but we know the human person, the interaction that we might have with Jesus Christ, the engine that is going to bring us the sense of radicalism in what we do and why we do it. I think that is the real advocacy that many immigrants, millions of immigrants, really expect from younger generations. Therefore, as always, I say in my confirmations to all the youngsters that are listening to me, I said, you are not the future of the church. Never think you're the future of the church. You're the present of the church, because without you, there is no future for the church. Therefore, it's important after this conversation to go out and say, what I'm doing for my dreamers, brothers and sisters, I'm doing with TPS people, I'm doing with people at the border, children incarcerated, families taken apart. What is my voice, and how can I center that only through faith and with conviction that Jesus Christ is telling us to love each other as real brothers and sisters? That's the powerful, powerful message that we can deliver today in today's world.
I love that idea, right? I love communicating to young people that you're not the future of the church. You're the church right now. You're acting right now as the church, and you're living that. Michael, I wonder if we could ask you that question. How can young people think about themselves as being the church right now? And also, how do we think in the future? How do we carry all these good ideas, these good works forward into the future to change what that looks like, so that we don't stay with the same problems that we've had in the past?
Well, I think this is a profoundly holy moment that we're in, as we see mass movements taking place across the country, across the world, and standing up for Black lives, in mobilizing in profoundly courageous and bold ways to oppose systems of death and oppression. I think of the Black Lives Matter movement as something that us as Latina, Latinos, Latinx communities can learn a great deal from, because we've been enduring our own struggles for many generations. but I see the leadership that many Black leaders are providing at this moment. And I think about a few things. We're talking about fundamentally defunding police departments and radically reforming our criminal justice systems. And I think for some that seems too radical. But one thing to think about is we have to look at these things theologically and spiritually. I'm gonna paraphrase something from a Protestant theologian, so I hope that's okay here. But Walter Brueggemann, the Old Testament scholar who's written a great deal about the prophets, often talks about the methods of empire and how empires operate. And we have to understand that the United States is a colonial empire from the very beginning. We conquered indigenous communities that lived in this nation long before Europeans arrived here. And they had nations of their own. They had thriving communities of their own. There were networks of cultures and communities that were interconnected between what is now today the United States and Central and South America. But one thing that Brueggemann talks about is he says that within empires, there's always a temptation to seduce us into thinking that violence and that militarism is a part of life, is a way of life. And that it forces us to think simply in the here and now and to not see an alternative reality beyond the reality that we face, which is constant violence, constant policing, constant militarization, constant surveillance. And the work of the prophets is to see well beyond that, is to see God's vision for the world. And I see in the leadership of those who are on the front lines of this movement for Black lives, a vision of a world beyond the world that we've been accustomed to living in. It's a world in which communities can thrive, in which elders and youth can support one another, in which we can resolve our own issues through dialogue and through the wisdom of the elders and the youth and the people in our communities who've been through life and know how to resolve their own. And so I think this is a moment for us as Catholics, for us as Christians, to think about what our role is in this work. I also think, we come back to Jesus a lot, but I oftentimes think we do a poor job of talking about the role that Jesus played in seeking to disrupt systems of death and oppression. I think about the last week of Jesus' life in Palm Sunday and what that meant. Jesus as a Palestinian Jew, a dark-skinned Palestinian Jew, we have to remember that. He led a movement of people into Jerusalem during Passover. Passover representing the exodus from Egypt, the exodus out of slavery, the exodus out of oppression. And the Romans understood what an explosive memory the Passover was. And so the Jewish people, as a colonized people, they were a colonized people under the Roman Empire. The Romans would send fleets of soldiers to Jerusalem because Passover was a time of pilgrimage. Latinos, we enjoy pilgrimages, right? And so thousands and thousands of Jews would pilgrimage to Jerusalem. It was a hotbed of energy, anger, hope, enthusiasm. And so the Romans made sure that they suppressed any type of movement. So Jesus arrives in Jerusalem at this very moment. He goes to the nexus of religious, economic, military, and political power. And what does he do? He marches in on a donkey as Roman soldiers are on chariots and horses, and they have all their military might showing, and Jesus rolls in on a donkey. And he basically is goading the Roman soldiers to say, look at me. Look at me in this movement of people. And then he goes and he flips over the tables of the money changers. And so Jesus is, in essence, disrupting a system of exploitation, of human denigration, and of religious idolatry. And we, as Catholics and Christians, have to recognize that we are called to work for the reign of God. We are called to disrupt these systems. We're called to go to great lengths. We're called to exercise moral courage. We're called to be on the streets at this very moment to be Catholic is to be in the midst of those from the Black Lives Matter movement. It's to be in the midst of all the youth, all the immigrant youth who've led this movement for immigration reform for generations. This is what it means at this very moment.
That's wonderful, and it's very challenging, Michael. And I'd like to turn now to questions that are coming from people who are watching here today, because one of them follows right up on that question. And this is from Sebastian, who is in Manhattan. We're getting questions from around the country, by the way. It's wonderful, the interest that we're seeing in this conversation. And Sebastian asks this. Sebastian says, the pulpit has powers, and when our leadership and clergy are reluctant to even declare Black Lives Matter during the homily, it's a great issue. It's time to stop giving so much attention to Anglo sensibilities and start having these kinds of candid conversations, even if they make people uncomfortable. How can we move past that? How can we start having more candid conversations? How can we move from words to action? Olga, why don't we start with you on that question, if that's okay?
Sure. So I think I want to start by piggybacking off of something Michael just said. I think something that has really made it easy for me to really engage and report on this movement for so many years is that this is a movement that's reimagining a world that is a better world. It's highlighting this fight for Black liberation, but it's also imagining a world that would be better for everyone, including white Americans, including white Catholics. And I think just starting from that place, starting from understanding that this is a movement that is centered in love, that this is a movement that's centered in that very radical idea of dismantling oppression, dismantling exploitation, dismantling the colonial empire that this country has had since it was founded. That is something that, as Michael said, this is what Jesus calls us to do, right? So I think that once people start to make that connection, I think it should be easier to have that conversation. And I think even once you acknowledge that, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be very hard to sit in a conversation with family, with friends, and say, okay, this is the first time that I'm engaging with this movement. This is the first time that I'm engaging with the term itself, Black Lives Matter. And just, it's okay to sit in that. I think it's okay to sit with your community and to have those conversations, because I think that's the number one way that we're going to move this forward. And I think the number one thing is to just keep challenging. I said this earlier, keep challenging your pastors, keep challenging the people in your lives, keep challenging the people in your family, and help them to reframe what are very strong misconceptions that people have had about this movement since 2013, right? Because people have been doing this work since 2013 and even before the actual expression came forward. And I think there's a lot of misinformation that people have consumed. And I think just sitting with that and having those conversations and remembering, especially when we talk to people that we love, like the bishop said earlier, we are people of encounter. We are people who are operating from a place of love. And I think just that has helped me in my own personal life. I have had to have very difficult conversations with Dominicans who are related to me, who are my blood, who I love very, very dearly. And I think I shifted in my 20s from being really angry and saying, oh, you guys are engaging in anti-Black behavior by doing this. And it shifted more to, okay, you are a person that I love, a person that I respect. Let me work through this with you. And I think those are just two things to always bear in mind when we want to talk about this movement and when we want to get involved in it. And just a reminder, it's okay to feel like this is weird. It's okay to feel as if this sucks, because the discomfort is a part of it. So I just want to keep encouraging everyone in our communities and outside of our communities to not be afraid of that discomfort, because it means you're doing the work,
That's wonderful. I love that, because I think we're all called right now to listen and to lean into these challenging conversations and to understand that sometimes we have to live in these tensions, and that's how we move forward. Our next question is from Bishop William Skillstad, who is the retired Bishop of Spokane and the former president of the USCCB. And he has written in to ask us something which is very much along the same lines. And maybe Bishop Dorsonville, you could take this to start us off. He asks, how do we as a church rise above the political polarity in our society to be effective carriers, livers, and proclaimers of the social teaching of the church? How do we rise above the polarization that we see all around us every day, sometimes many, many times a day?
Yes, I would say to Bishop, and with all my respect, because he knows where he is coming from, the only way to proclaim and to to do the job that Jesus entitles to do is not to be afraid to promote the human encounter. Because most of the time, all these kind of extreme positions, fear of the unknown. And when we are trying to say, that's your brother and your sister, you can sit down and talk to them and go deeper in the experience of that human encounter, is when things might be getting softer in the way that we conceived the other person. The other person is the beauty to be able to go into deeper and deeper into that reality. But sometimes because my fears, that doesn't allow me to open. For I guess that bishops in this nation, we have the real commitment before God's side to continue to be the preachers, but also to live what we do and what we say by promoting the ways of understanding, knowing that only by actions that will continue to promote the conglomeration or the unity of this country in one people that have the right to continue to elaborate the paths where we're going to find the real justice and love of God might be something that we're going to get into the midst of our parishes, of our dioceses, and around the country. For that, we count not only us, but the people that is surrounding us. Most of the time when we go in an action of advocacy, many people say to us in government, Bishop, we hear you, but we don't hear your people. And that is something that also have to be kind of clear. When I hear Olga, when I hear Michael, when I hear Juan, what I hear, voices that they are young and strong, and they are able to open up another dimension that sometimes is so important for this world to listen to you. And I really think that that's the outcome of this panel, that many people are going to finish this reflection and they're going to go out inspired to go to USCCB webpage to look for justice for immigrants, to try to find out how I'm going to be an advocate, how I'm going to call my congressperson, how I'm going to try to find a way to say, yes, I do care for this human person. And that's when the real message and the real change begins to be true.
Thanks so much. Juan, I want to come to you now on this and to follow up on something that Bishop Dorsonville said and that everybody said. We've talked about fear. We've talked about challenging conversations. How are you approaching these kinds of challenging conversations among your friends and family? And somebody also has written in and asked us, what about how can mixed immigration status families cope with the added levels of fear and the added levels of insecurity that we're facing? So how are you living that out or finding those things in your life or in your friends?
For me, it's been a lot about learning and seeing what resources are out there, what campaigns are happening, how can we provide those resources to our communities. Here in DC, learning about the campaigns to protect our communities around housing with the DC Reclaim Rent Control campaign that's going on, and seeing how we can get community members to be a part of that, seeing how in the city of DC, we're trying to get funds for our communities. And I think it's something interesting having those discussions with their families, because sometimes, I know my family at first, when we began speaking about our immigration status, there was this fear of ICE coming after us, ICE coming after my family. And it was after showing and sharing how when we came as a community, we could protect ourselves, we could protect our community, and really support each other. I know that it's been a lot about having different discussions with my family, about teaching my cousins, about sharing some of those resources that exist. Because I think we're more powerful when we have the right information, when we have a community to really support us in all of this. And I know it's been conversations where like I send messages back and forth between my family, my parents, my cousins, where we go into long debates about different topics. And it's having those discussions with our immediate family that I think can be really fruitful in advancing these conversations forward and advancing our communities forward.
Thanks so much. And now I've got a great question, and this is really for all of you. So someone just let me know who wants to take it first. Someone writes in and asks, many of us have family in our home country or heritage countries. For some, the family back home has been hit harder by the crisis and may not have work from home or economic stimulus packages. And it may be harder than usual for them to navigate these conversations around race and discrimination within these global conversations that are happening. Do any of you have ideas about the best way to open up the table across countries or continents? Are there discussion questions or strategies or ways these conversations across cultures might work and might be strengthened? Anyone want to take that? Olga, you want to take that?
Sure. Sorry, I hadn't unmuted myself yet. But yeah, I think I'm just going to point to a lot of what I kind of started to talk about earlier. I think that there is, and again, I'm going to start from my own kind of personal perspective. I have relatives who are back on the island, who are back in the Dominican Republic versus relatives who are here. So they live very, very different lives. So sometimes it's very difficult to talk about things that are happening within a US context and to make them kind of understand. And again, one thing that has helped for me is just to find an article, let's say an example, if the Times or America or a bunch of different places, especially Catholic ones, talk about this movement, sharing it with my family, and then just kind of phrasing it like, what do you guys think about this? And I think just getting people talking, when you get people using, I get this a lot from my sister who's a teacher, when you get people using I statements, it becomes easier to kind of remove a lot of the vulnerabilities that people have when they're entering into these conversations. And I think those resources and then holding each other accountable and want to also bring the accountability aspect of all of this work home. I think just starting book clubs and I think engaging in text and not just things that you agree with, but I think things that are also challenging. One thing that I'm doing in my own personal life, we're talking about what abolishing police law enforcement would look like in this country. And not everyone agrees with it in that group, but we're having conversations about what that would look like at the local level. We're looking at how to get involved in our local communities to help. I live in a predominantly Black and brown immigrant community in the Bronx, right? So we're thinking about active ways to help families who have lost jobs in our building or back home, and I think just it all begins with conversation and then just trying to figure out what's going to work best for the community you're in, right? You might be someone who works best, who learns best from reading and engaging in conversation, watching panels like this and then discussing it, or you might be someone who needs to take to the streets. And I think just encouraging people to do something, even if it feels like it's nothing, any kind of step, it's helpful from wherever you are. And I think that I found that in my own personal life, that's been very unifying with so many of us spread out all over the country and all over the world, just having discussions about how to be in community with each other, how to help one another during this crisis and figuring out what that looks like. I think that's a wonderful place to start. And again, even when it's uncomfortable, because I know Latinos, like we have those problematic relatives who, since the last election, have sort of shifted politically in the entire direction, in the opposite direction of what you expected them to do. But even with those, just sit with it and just challenge them to be better. Because again, like the bishop said, right, we are encountering the human person, right? We have to keep reminding ourselves that we have to encounter one another and learn from one another.
Thank you. I love that. And I love that so many of our questions that we're having coming in from young Latinos are asking, how can we build unity? How can we build bridges? It's wonderful. One of these questions, Michael, I wonder if I might give to you, because I wonder if you experience it in your work in Chicago. This person asks, how can we build bridges to other religions, and in particular to American evangelicals, and work together on these issues?
I think that, we have to seek to build relationships with others. I oftentimes think that, right now, if people want to do something, there's a number of things that I would recommend. One is join an organization. join an organization or form a committee at your parish or your university. Get involved. It's easy to be isolated at any time, especially right now during a pandemic. Join an organization that is working for justice, that's working for immigration reform, that's working to address police brutalities. And if you want to work with interfaith groups, join an interfaith group. They're out there. There are groups that are meeting all the time, right now remotely, but oftentimes in person. So that would be my one recommendation. Two, right now, if you want to do something, find ways to be in solidarity with those on the front lines of the various movements. Be in solidarity with those on the front lines of the Black Lives Matter movement. Be in solidarity with those on the front lines of the immigration reform movements and the DACA movements. But be in relationship with those people and figure out ways to get involved and to support. The other thing is, oftentimes we worry about taking that first step. Are we too late into the equation? Have we waited too long? What will people think? But God recognizes in each of us that we have something to contribute, a gift to offer. And we have to understand, and I think this is especially true for Latinos who've been put down and oppressed in a myriad of ways throughout their lives, that it's easy to let doubt, those voices of doubt, consume our willingness to step out and to be courageous and to lead, but recognize that you have something to offer. And so take a risk, be bold, be courageous. The few things that I just want to reaffirm what Olga and Juan said is, reading, learning, acting. These are vital things. Malcolm X talked about how racism is perpetuated by two things, by greed and skillful miseducation. So if we're not actively working to educate ourselves and to learn and grow, we are falling prey to the miseducation around us. And the last thing I'm going to say, and I know it doesn't actually to the question, but I think it's important for Latinas and Latinos to hear right now, is that we have to engage in the upcoming elections. We have to get out and vote. If we can't vote, we have to encourage our communities to vote. And also we need to participate in the census. These are vital things at this moment.
Thanks so much. Bishop Dorsonville, we've got one more question for you. A couple questions came in asking about how pastors can work to reflect their communities better. Someone puts it this way: the Bishops' Conference has called all leaders to learn intercultural competence, to work across boundaries, and to build true community within our church. How can we make sure that all pastoral leaders learn these kinds of skills, and what steps are being taken to help pastors reflect their communities?
Evidently, every single diocese is having different offices, but the Multicultural Outreach Office seems to be an office that is taking a very important place in the structure of every diocese. Then I guess that it's important for us to continue to tap into the multicultural spectrum that many of the parishes in the United States are beginning to face. The future is a future of a brown church rather than a white church. And we know that because the numbers and the statistical reports comes that this is a fact. We are a universal church, and in the United States, we are the result of so many cultures in one parish. And every pastor, since the moment of training them in the seminary, we need to continue to emphasize how important it's not only to learn a language. Sometimes I don't care about the person who learns how to speak a language. I care about a person who understands a culture. That is extremely important. And sometimes we see there are so many pastors that even with very small skills of different languages, they are open to the multicultural spectrum to their parishes. I guess that is something that has been little by little growing. The spectrum of solidarity in difficult times, as we are going right now through these times, is essential because that's like an open window for those who come and to see the reality of different people from different cultures, the way that they relate to each other, and the way that we can continue to show solidarity, but also compassion and love. I really think that that's something very immersing to the priestly heart, and I really think that the numbers of multicultural priests and priests who love the diversity in their parishes is growing, thank God. And I don't have any doubt that we will continue to grow in numbers.
And that makes so much sense to me. I love that you use the term solidarity too, because I think so often we hear this idea that there's a crisis of solidarity, and in many ways there is, but something we've seen over the past weeks and months is a real show of solidarity for justice and support of those in need. And so many people that we've discussed here today have been a real part of that. I want to do our last question for the night. We're about to wrap up, and just a quick answer from each one of you, and we'll start with you, Juan, if that's all right. What's one action that young Latino Catholics, young viewers who are watching here today can take in response to what they've heard here in this discussion? What should they take away from it? What can they do?
I think be informed about what's going on in your community, see what steps you can take to take action, and like spread that knowledge beyond yourself, like share that knowledge with your parents or with your family members, because they might not have access to that. And so I think educating ourselves as a community, I think, can go a long way.
Thank you. How about you, Bishop Dorsonville? One thing that young people can do as they leave this conversation.
Well, think about not my recommendation, but the whole recommendation of all the bishops across the nation. I'm a voice that tries to bring all my brother bishops. We say in the name of God, and why not we do the voice of Pope Francis that says, pray for immigrant families. Accompany these immigrant families, which is so important. Show your will to integrate them into your own family because they are your brothers and sisters. And lastly, don't give up being an advocate for those who suffer discrimination, injustice, and poverty. You will shine in the kingdom of God.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Michael, how about you? What's one action that viewers can take as they leave this discussion?
I would just reiterate again, I think the importance of joining an organization, being a part of a community, whether it's at your university, your parish, an organization in your neighborhood or in your city. This is a moment that is calling on young Latinos, Latinas, Latinx people from across the country to engage in this moment, in this movement. And I liked what Olga said, this movement for love, for liberation. We need to be in this movement in this moment. And so I would urge everybody who wants to do something to find an organization to be a part of.
Thank you. Olga, how about you? What's one action people can take as we wrap up?
Sure. So since we've all talked about in our own ways about the importance of learning and learning from people who have been doing this work for years and engaging with that text, I want to just shout out, there are a lot of amazing Black Catholic women who have been talking about anti-racism work, what it means to be in solidarity with one another. And I think one great resource that I think everyone should engage with, Tia Noel Pratt, she is a sociologist, educator, writes on systemic racism, and she just launched the Black Catholic syllabus, which is meant to help people learn and really think critically about a lot of the things that we talked about, white supremacy, anti-racism work, the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that's a wonderful starting place and resource for anyone who wants to get involved and learn. And you can find that at tiapratt.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank everybody here so much. And I want to thank our participants in particular for being here for this powerful conversation. I'm really struck by the fact that at a time when so many are demoralized, Our Catholic faith and Latino communities are showing us how to put faith in action together. I want to thank all of you for watching this here today and for joining us for this virtual Latino Leaders Gathering. This discussion will be recorded and posted on our website and on our social channels for later viewing as well. And we'll also have follow-up resources like those that have been mentioned here on our website for you to take advantage of. Thanks also to our co-sponsors, the Archdiocese of Washington, and in particular to Molly Herrera for her help putting this together, as well as to my colleagues John Carr and Anna Misla, and for everything they did to bring this together. We're especially grateful to our partners at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, Optimum Audio, and AI Media for helping us with the technical end of things here. And finally, please join me in thanking our panel, Bishop Mario Dorsonville, Juan Belmont Guerrero, Michael Okińczyc-Cruz, and Olga Segura for being a part of this wonderful discussion. Thank you all so much, and good night.